Hi everyone, welcome back. Today we are going to have a look. This is a video I've been meaning to do for a while, but we're going to have a look at whether emotional abuse can make you sick and how an abuser can affect your physical health and perhaps even make you chronically ill. Now, in the work that I've done by people affected by abuse and trauma, they usually ask me a couple of questions, get the same questions every time. And the first one is, this person that I'm in the relationship with, be that mom or dad or partner, whoever they are they disordered? Have they got a cluster B personality disorder? Cassandra, you are the psychologist. Can you tell me? Whether they're a narcissist or a psychopath, or whether they've got a disorder, or are they just a garden variety mean person? And the second question is what's happening to me in this relationship abuse? Am I kind of imagining it? Is it in my head, or even am I the abuser here? That's what they are saying to me, so perhaps it's me. And the response that I will always say to this with a client is, how do you feel? Are you feeling generally terrible? Often they are, mentally and physically. Are you spending a lot of time anxious or panicky and walking on eggshells? Are you isolated? Are you second guessing yourself? You can't trust your own judgment anymore. Are you kind of afraid to make decisions? Maybe you feel overwhelmed and a bit lost. Now, whether you're around a person who's got a diagnosis or not, it's not really relevant here. This is about how their behaviour is impacting on you. And this is why I choose my language carefully and define this person as a perpetrator. They are choosing to perpetrate an abusive behaviour, an unacceptable and abusive behaviour on somebody else. So rather than trying to spend your time trying to figure out whether the perpetrator is disordered, with the subtext very often that maybe if I can find out whether they're disordered, maybe we can treat that, all that stuff, and it can be fixed. What we need to do instead is to shift the focus back to ourselves, and we ask ourselves quite honestly, are we in danger? Are you around someone whose behaviour is risky and whose behaviour is showing a pattern of escalation, and that risk is increasing incrementally? So ask yourself, whether your mind, your body, and sometimes even your soul feel like they're in danger because of someone else's unacceptable behaviour towards yourself. While you're doing that evaluation, it could be the case that you might not think you're in any physical danger because nobody's using physical violence against you. But today we're going to take a look at that assumption and look at the consequences to your health of mental, emotional, and that verbal abuse, all of those psychological things. So as a health psychologist, I want to help you to understand the very real potential health risks, what those are for you, simply by being subject to these difficult relational, environmental conditions, relational abuse. Be in your experience and your reality so that you can get a true understanding of the risk that's involved to yourself. Even if that abuse is emotional and mental without any violence present, this can still affect your health. So that is what we're going to do today. And the reason that we're going to do that is to help you to feel more able to keep yourself safe, to empower you to make healthy choices that really support your well-being. So let's get going. And we're gonna start with biology here. And we're going to look at something called allostatic overload. Now, in the mechanics of the traumatized human body. So we've all probably heard of homeostasis if we went to high school and we didn't fall asleep in biology. And that is the state of our body being in a biological balance internally, and how our body maintains that state of balance. But we might not have heard of allostasis. Allostasis is something different. In simple terms, what it is the actual processes that are involved in maintaining that state of homeostasis. As you can imagine, when we encounter a threat or a stressful situation, that might trigger a lot of different processes off under that umbrella. Everything from elevated blood pressure and cardiovascular changes to digestive changes. It can happen in a response to that threat, in whatever form that threat stimulus takes, whether it's abuse or something else. So because allostasis is that collection of processes that help us to maintain that balance of homeostasis, we define it as achieving stability through change. And it was introduced by Sterling and Eyer, who also defined allostasis as a set of mind-body systemic events aimed at regulating recovery from stress. So our individual allostatic load can be thought of as the amount of processes we've got going on at the same time, and the demands that those have on ourselves when we face those external stressful triggers. To get an idea of that, we can imagine your body as being like your computer. And what does our computer do when we have loads of windows open? We've got loads of programs open, all running at the same time. Well, think of it like that. The more allostasis processes you have running, the slower your computer goes and the worse it performs, until finally it crashes and it breaks. So that's a good way of thinking of it. So let's have a look at an example of how that allostatic overload could happen in an abusive or coercive relationship. Let's just imagine that you're trying to sleep and somebody suddenly wakes you up. They start verbally attacking you. Now, in that situation, your body systems, they instantly go from preparing your body for sleep to preparing it for fight, flight, or freeze. And yeah, you've got all those bodily changes going on. And as time goes by, just imagine that these things will become more regular. And your partner randomly verbally attacks you, or they threaten to harm themselves, or you, or your children, they're threatening you. Or they might threaten to leave you randomly without any warning. You just never know what will happen. And therefore, you're in this constant state of arousal. You're walking on eggshells and you've got all those processes going all the time. So eventually your body is going to be in an almost constant state of hyperarousal, ready for the next instant to happen. So it isn't just the incidents of being verbally or emotionally abused that harm you here either. It is your own very understandable chronic negative expectation as well as that constant state of arousal from those threatening incidents that seem to increase the allostatic load. And this state can be characterised by a really intense anxiety, chronic anxiety, and anticipation of adversity, a sense of dread. You're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. And that leads to those elevated levels of stress hormones that becoming chronic. So once that happens, you'll be experiencing just a gamut of symptoms, most likely. They can almost feel like a syndrome, a collective of symptoms. Our fight, flight and freeze system, our threat system, is adaptive and is evolutionary. It's designed very well to protect us from immediate threats, somebody cutting us up in the traffic, the sudden predatory attack kind of thing that our ancestors would have had. It was never designed to be switched on all the time, overworked and overstimulated and overused like this. So when we hit that allostatic overload, it has incredibly serious consequences for our health. Our allostatic load is the high price that the body pays for containing the effects of all those arousing stimuli and the expectation of those negative consequences. So now we know what allostatic load is and how it relates to abuse. We can have a look at what can happen when we experience an overload. So we'll take a look at the clinical criteria for that. So we have two criterion for identifying allostatic overload. That's criterion A and B. Both must be present to diagnose an allostatic overload. So in criterion A, we have the presence of an identifiable source of distress in the form of recent life event or chronic stress, and the stressor is judged to tax or exceed individual coping skills when its full nature and full circumstances are evaluated. So this is the abusive situation that you're in that is finding it increasingly difficult to cope with. And criteria B, we've got the stressor is associated with one or more of the following features which have occurred within 6 months after the onset of the stressor. And that's at least two of the following symptoms. It's the difficulty falling asleep, all the sleep things, the restless sleep, early morning awakening, lack of energy, generalized anxiety, irritability, the mood stuff, sadness, demoralization. Number 2 here, we have significant impairment in social and occupational functioning. That's the things that you want to do in life that you're becoming more difficult, perhaps overwhelming for you. And significant impairment in environmental mastery. That's a lovely bit of psychology babble, isn't it? But what it means is feeling overwhelmed by the demands of your everyday life, just the everyday things. So these are the criteria, but it is likely that if you're in an abusive situation for any length of time, you'll probably be experiencing other symptoms as well. And that can be everything from digestive issues like IBS or bad back or skin problems, eczema, or the worsening of an already existing condition that you've got. So if you take yourself up to the doctor when you begin to experience these symptoms related to allostatic overload, without understanding the effect that chronic stress and trauma has had on your body, so you kind of think that you're not well, you're ill. So maybe you've experienced some of the symptoms we've covered here. Maybe you've had digestive problems, backaches, headaches are very common. There's unexplained aches and pains. And it could be that you've approached that primary care health provider for mental health issues too, like depression, anxiety, and the GP may have offered you medication for either of those mental health things or maybe as well for the physical things, without really considering the relational abuse. So if you take the medicine, of course it's going to be a little bit like cleaning your house while it's on fire. Yes, the medication will do the job. It might help with some of the symptoms temporarily, but it is not going to address the root cause of your suffering or that illness syndrome, the many symptoms, which is because of the abuse, the stress of that. If you're being abused or questioning whether you are, of course, as well as your GP, there are lots of organisations that can help you. I will put some in the description, so I'd encourage you to always seek that out and get in touch with an expert organisation that can really understand that and help you and support you with it. So what are the potential long-term health outcomes here? Stress is a small word, isn't it? And it's one we use a lot in everyday life. But when it comes to chronic stress, it can shorten your life, or at the very least greatly reduce the quality of it. And chronic stress can be disastrous for your immune system, your vascular system, your neurology, your digestive and limbic, and even your reproductive system. In fact, it can harm or damage all of your body's systems when it is chronic. So we know abuse does not need to be physical to seriously damage your health. But also there is evidence that allostatic load and the resulting long-term distress and stress from that can actually trigger or cause or worsen any number of chronic health conditions. Not limited to, but including obesity, diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular conditions, autoimmune-related things like fibromyalgia, fibro, chronic fatigue, chronic idiopathic pain. The list goes on and on and on. So the risk is very real for you if you are suffering this kind of abuse. Now, Before we wrap up this video, I really want to stress the idea of behavioural escalation, looking out for those patterns in a perpetrator when you're doing that risk assessment. Now you know all this stuff about health. If you are suffering from mental or emotional abuse, that can often escalate. And there are statistics that we cannot ignore. 3 women a week die at the hands of a partner or ex-partner. So this stuff does happen. It can happen. And we can't deny those kind of statistics. So please take all and every risk seriously when you're doing that risk assessment of your own situation. Add those risky behaviours up. Are they worsening? Are they escalating? Are they becoming more frequent or more intense? So try and be honest with yourself about any escalation that's happening, because violent behaviour by perpetrators, it's more often than not preempted by a behavioural pattern of verbal, emotional or psychological abuse that often comes before the violence. So if you see that escalation, please seek help and support and protect yourself, because you've got every right. It is your right as a human being to feel safe and to take measures to protect yourself from harm so that you can be well and that you can thrive. What an awful lot that was. If you enjoyed the video, if it was useful to you, or if you have an experience that you want to share, you can put that in the comments, like, subscribe. Please stay on the channel if you want to learn more about psychology and health and well-being. Thank you for joining me. I will see you next time.